Hey, Luke and Maddie here with Average Optimized, and this week's Three Things show is for the book Strangers to Ourselves by Timothy D. Wilson. And the book is mind-blowing and full of blown mind supporting studies. Quick intro. This book is 262 pages paperback and 8 hours and 36 minutes audible. It is described on Amazon as follows. In an eye-opening tour of the unconscious, as contemporary psychological science has redefined it, Timothy D. Wilson introduces us to a hidden mental world of judgments, feelings, and motives that introspection may never show us. This is not your psychoanalyst's unconscious. The adaptive unconscious that empirical psychology has revealed and that Wilson describes is much more than a repository of primitive drives and conflict-ridden memories, like Freud suggests. It is a set of pervasive, sophisticated, and mental processes that size up our worlds, set goals, and initiate action, all while we are consciously thinking about something else. If we don't know ourselves, our potentials, feelings, or motives, it is most often, Wilson tells us, because we have developed a plausible story about ourselves that is out of touch with our adaptive unconscious, citing evidence that too much introspection can actually do damage. Wilson makes the case for better ways of discovering our unconscious selves. So, what are three things we can use from this book? 1. Self-Psychotherapy. The unconscious is an efficient, multifaceted pattern detector. It is comprised of multiple interconnected modules, whereas the conscious is just one entity. The adaptive unconscious, as Timothy Wilson calls it, develops chronic ways of interpreting information from our environments. These ideas become chronically acceptable, and because they are chronically acceptable, the unconscious saves energy by forming habitual thought processes. I.e., your unconscious will get used to thinking a certain way, and you'll become used to firing, and it will become used to firing in a certain pattern and recognizing situations and eliciting similar and consistent responses. On the other hand, on the conscious side, there are ways in which we describe our lives and who we are, our narratives. Because of the bias of the conscious, because of external influences such as social and personal expectations and recent experiences, our narratives don't always correlate with our unconscious patterns and habits. Timothy Wilson cites that the closer our narratives are to our underlying unconscious motives, feelings, and patterns, the more at peace we will be, and the less our narratives have to do with our unconscious reality, the less at peace we will be. Timothy Wilson shows you how to form your narrative by cutting out introspection in the popular sense, because of the conscious bias, and suggests you to pay more attention to your behavior. You can pursue this peace of mind either by yourself with a notebook using only explicit behavior and not too much introspection, or you can do this with an actual psychotherapist, as long as you construct a life narrative that is supported by your unconscious patterns and motives. No, thank you. 2. Gut feelings. Not all animals have a conscious awareness, yet they can still react and respond to dangerous or pleasurable stimuli. How is that? Timothy Wilson shows that the unconscious plays a large part in our responses. To explain it, he uses an example of someone walking through a forest and seeing a snake-shaped stick on the ground. Your quick process pattern detector unconscious winds you up to the idea of a snake, and then your slower conscious processing can decipher that it's only a stick. Now, that's an obvious and simple example of the unconscious taking control, and that's easy. But there was another study done where people played a card game. There were 4 decks of cards, A, B, C, and D. When you drew cards from the A deck or the B deck, you would have big wins and big losses. When you drew from the C and the D decks, you would have smaller wins and losses. But it was set up so that if you consistently chose cards from the A and B decks, you would lose. And this is where it gets cool. So after a little while of playing, when people's hands would move towards the cards in piles A or B, skin conductance sensors on their fingers would detect an elevation in arousal. So the unconscious would perceive the danger after detecting a pattern after so many trials and elicit a slight fear response that influenced a physiological arousal. There have also been other studies that show physiological responses to warn people of underlying patterns. And your senses at any moment are taking in over 11 million pieces of information, and we can only consciously process 40 of those at a time. So if your unconscious is sending you signals that could potentially guide your behavior, you can feel good about trusting your gut and consoling your conscious with a maybe next time. Number 3, the chase. If you had the choice of sitting in an empty room and having every reward that you could ever want, but in the downtime you weren't allowed to do anything, or only getting the rewards after working toward them for a longer period of time, most people would choose to work for those rewards. And that's the thing. The rewards aren't even that great when you do get them. And the lasting euphoria from such a reward is physiologically limited by different internal processes. Just think of what it would be like to live just 2 days with that high-hearted feeling of rewards like winning the lottery. Not only would it be exhausting, but you also wouldn't be able to think straight and make rational choices. So the body has a way of taking you back to baseline for your own sake. Oops, sorry. So there's no such thing as perpetual euphoric happiness. That said, like Maddie, she's perpetually happy for some reason. That said, that doesn't mean you can't live with a fulfilling pursuit of rewards. If you have a fulfilling activity that you do to fight for a reward, or fight for an eventual state of quality of living, or rock climbing ability, say, then pursuing that reward by engaging in that activity can bring about just as much positivity and pleasure over the course of the pursuit as the final reward itself. A reward without a chase is an empty reward. The chase is the part that is important. Always be striving and growing, and you'll find the real sense of pleasure and fulfillment. So, to recap, construct a life narrative that is supported by your unconscious motives by objectively studying your own behavior from situation to situation. Do this alone or with a psychotherapist. In times of quick thinking, trust your instincts. Your unconscious has access to more information than you do, and is an unbiased system designed to keep you out of danger. Finally, find an activity that keeps you engaged and do it, and discover its facets and pursue the rewards at the end of its rainbow for a more pleasurable life. This book was intense. It blew my mind at every chance it got. I loved all the studies he cited, and just this topic overall of the unconscious was so fascinating. I think Timothy D. Wilson did a great job explaining things in an understandable way and citing research, while still keeping it generic enough for a lay person like me to be able to follow it. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but I loved the studies he cited. I've linked up a video in the description from one of the studies that he cites, and I recommend that you check it out if this unconscious psychology stuff interests you. The video is short and is about what happens when you disconnect the two hemispheres of the brain, and how you now, without the connection, practically have two different people inside of your head. So check that video out, it's pretty awesome. As always, my short little 3 things show doesn't go into all of the cool stuff. And Maddie recommends getting this book if you like psychology, or are interested in understanding yourself and your unconscious motives better. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.